50 years later, has the dream been fulfilled?
The dream is still in the process of becoming a reality. It's not there yet, but we're on our way, and there will be no turning back.
You smile when you...
Because I believe it. I believe it. I don't think there's any way for that dream to be denied. It's part of the DNA of the American psyche.
That was our Byron Pitts with the late Congressman John Lewis on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial back in 2013. And joining me now on the Powerhouse Roundtable is ABC News Nightline co-anchor Byron Pitts, our chief White House correspondent Jonathan Karl, Leah Wright-Rigueur, professor at Harvard's Kennedy School and an ABC News contributor, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, and Heidi Heitkamp, the former Democratic senator from North Dakota. Welcome to you all. And Byron, you have had many poignant and profound observations about the fight for civil rights and equality. We just saw those excerpts from your interview with John Lewis. Your thoughts this morning on his importance?
Well, good morning, Martha. I think John Lewis symbolizes what's possible in America. Right? What's possible with courage and conviction. This is a man from Troy, Alabama, a sharecropper's son. He wasn't the most eloquent. He wasn't the most dynamic member of the civil rights movement in the 60s. But what a force he was. You know, John Lewis was 5'6" in dress shoes, right? As I described in the air yesterday, he was an acorn who stood up to oak trees. This was a man who because he loved America so, because he was so optimistic about America, he believed that if he put his life in harm's way, he could help make America better. He didn't do what he did because he was angry about America. I mean, he was angry about circumstances, but he believed so deeply in our country that he thought he could make a difference, and he did.
And John, the president ordered the flag to half-staff yesterday to honor John Lewis. He did tweet about him yesterday afternoon, saying he was saddened to hear the news of his death. But President Trump and John Lewis had some very vigorous disagreements.
Oh, they sure had. And the president waited some 14 hours before he said anything about John Lewis. But John Lewis had frankly thought Donald Trump was a racist. John Lewis questioned the legitimacy of Donald Trump's election victory because of Russian interference. So this was no question about it, a tense relationship on both sides. At one point, the president attacked Lewis, saying he was essentially all talk, no action. And I loved John Lewis's response. I want to read it to you here. He said, "I've been beaten, bloody, tear-gassed, fighting for what's right for America. I've marched at Selma with Dr. King. Sometimes that's what it takes to move your country in the right direction." He stood up to John Lewis. By the way, watching Byron at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, I had a chance to interview John Lewis at the exact same spot 10 years earlier on the 40th anniversary of the March on Washington. And it was one of the most remarkable moments that I've ever felt interviewing anybody. It's standing there with the man who spoke at that very spot at the same march as Dr. King. Really an incredible moment, and speaking with so much passion 40 years later, and as you saw, 50 years later as well.
No one will ever forget him who's ever met him, that is for sure. But John, I do want to turn to that new ABC News Washington Post poll out this morning. Joe Biden has a huge lead of 15 points against President Trump among registered voters nationally, and people unhappy with the way he's handled the pandemic. We've seen the president focus on everything but the pandemic this week. And that speech in the Rose Garden Tuesday, which was supposed to focus on Hong Kong, really basically turned into a campaign speech attacking Biden. He's doing that again this morning on Fox News. Why is he taking that approach?
Well, he believes that he's got to take Biden down. He thinks Biden's been been able to avoid criticism by staying at home. You know, they always talk about him being in his basement. He's not technically in his basement, but he is spending most of his time at home in Delaware. But our poll showed some really troubling signs for Donald Trump beyond the headline top line number. It showed that Trump is actually trailing Biden on the question of law and order. This has been a central issue that the president has put forward, and Biden has a significant lead. And even on the question of who do you trust more to handle the economy, it's a virtual tie. Trump is up 2 points. That's within the margin of error. So they feel they have to take Biden down.
And Chris Christie, there was a major shakeup in the Trump campaign this week. Campaign manager Brad Parscale was replaced by Bill Stepien, a former aide of yours when you were governor. You said 2 weeks ago the president is losing and he needs to change course. Will this do it? Will it help?
No, it won't do it, Martha, but it will help. Bill Stepien ran both my campaigns in 2009 and 2013 for governor. He is an extraordinarily skilled operative. He is very good at the nuts and bolts of campaigning, and his work, now that they have a professional in charge of that campaign, will add a point or two to the president just with the turnout work that he will do in the key swing states. But in the end, Martha, campaigns come down to the candidates, not to the operatives. The operatives are the ones who get rich and write books. The candidates are the ones that win elections. And so for this to change, for these numbers to change, the president's going to have to change. As I said a couple weeks ago, he's going to have to change both substantively and stylistically his approach to the American people. If he does that, there are 15 weeks to go, and there is plenty of time for the president to come back and make this a race that he can win. There are going to be a lot of big things that will happen in these next 15 weeks. But the core problem right now for the president is that what he's saying and doing is not working with the American people, and he needs to change that. Changing campaign chiefs with Bill Stepien will help along the margins. Bill's very talented, but he will not win this election for the president, and I think Bill would tell you that. Only the president can win this election for the president.
And Chris, even in the last couple of days, he almost seems to be doubling down with what he's been doing.
Well, listen, I think the president is a guy who often goes with his gut instincts. And as a politician, you're often tempted to do that, especially if you've had some success. Let's face it, the guy's run in one race in his life for the presidency of the United States, beat 16 other Republicans, myself included, in a crowded and talented primary, and then beat Hillary Clinton, who Barack Obama said was the most qualified person ever to run for president. So there's reason for him to trust his gut instincts. But you have to look at the numbers. You have to look at the atmosphere. What I've said to the president is you cannot run the same campaign in 2020 that you ran in 2016. The country is different in 2020 than it is in 2016. And the attitude of our people is different because of the pandemic, because of the economic displacement that's occurred from the pandemic, and because of the racial tensions that are now in our country. And so these are all things that you need to consider when deciding how to approach the electorate and sell your leadership and your plans for the future to them.
And Heidi, we're also seeing in these polls Trump has lost significant ground among rural voters since March. 72% supported him in late March, 62% in late May, and now down to 56%. And his approval rating overall and for handling the pandemic among those voters is down too. You've done a lot of work looking at rural voters. Should Trump be worried about the rural areas?
He absolutely needs to take the rural area the way he did in 2016. And I don't think that's going to happen. He won North Dakota by 36 points. He's not going to win North Dakota by 36 points again. And so leadership is what's on the ballot. And I bet you the new campaign manager for the president wishes he was selling Chris Christie and not Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has failed every leadership test. And we now are in crisis in this country, a health crisis, a racial crisis, an equality crisis, and people are looking for leadership. And what you see in these numbers, whether it is in rural America, urban America, suburban America, is they want a leader, and they're saying Donald Trump is not that person. And I don't think he can recover from this unless he changes the way he behaves. And he is not going to change the way he behaves. It is obvious in every interview that he does. He goes back to the same dog whistles that he's always used to basically amp up the base, and the base will not get him where he needs to go. I think one of the remarkable things about the poll is the loss of support among white evangelicals. That might be a result of the Supreme Court cases not turning out the way Donald Trump and white evangelicals would want them to. But at every point along the way, leadership is on the ballot, and Donald Trump has failed to be the leader this country needs or wants right now.
And Leah, amid these sinking poll numbers, on Friday, Defense Secretary Esper effectively banned displays of the Confederate flag on U.S. military bases, going against the president, who said just days earlier that people love it and that the flag is freedom of speech. Is he becoming even more out of touch? Is it not just that he is who he is, but even more out of touch with where the country is?
Well, he's becoming obsolete with everyone except for his base and his base of support. And, you know, one of the things that I want to point out is that this election isn't just a normal election. It's a referendum on how leadership works in the midst of a crisis. It's the worst of the worst situation. It's a global pandemic. It's a healthcare pandemic. It's a race relations pandemic. And we have a leader who, rather than trying to embrace these various, difficult and complicated factors and lean into the ways in which the country is changing rapidly, very, very rapidly, is instead doubling down on what his gut is telling him, what he knows, and what his base knows. And that's not going to expand, that's not going to win anything. The other thing to point out here is that there's a certain amount of irony in John Lewis dying in this moment. Because we like to remember John Lewis as the politician, as the statesman, and things like that, but he's also the activist, right? He's also the protester, he's the agitator. And so at a moment when Donald Trump is encouraging and authorizing the federal crackdown on protesters, peaceful protesters across the country, but particularly in areas like Portland, we see, right, that instead we should be celebrating this legacy of somebody like John Lewis, who really enables, right, the truest sense of democracy. We should be looking for a leader that is really pushing us to a better place and really pushing us towards a nation that is egalitarian, that is equitable, that is about equality. And instead, what we see is a president who is shunning those things in even the simplest of ways.
And John, on top of all that, and on top of everything you've said, we've got these tell-all books that come out. The latest, Mary Trump, Donald Trump's niece, and really some extraordinary accusations in that book. And she's done some interviews, the first one with our George Stephanopoulos. Do those books make a difference?
Well, Donald Trump certainly notices that those books, whether they're books that are tell-alls that are just devastating critiques on him, or those by his supporters have been on the bestseller list. But it's been telling that more recently, it's been that book and John Bolton's book that have dominated the bestseller looks. And look, I don't know if it makes a difference, but Mary Trump's book did offer something new. We've heard so little. We've heard so little from the president. We know so little about his upbringing, his relationship with his parents and with his brothers. And we got a little bit of a window in that in Mary Trump's book. So in that sense, it does add something new to the equation here.
And we should mention your book, John Carl, not a tell-all, but an excellent bestseller, front row at the Trump Show. And Byron, I want to turn to the Democrats here. The convention organizers for the Democratic Convention told members of Congress and delegates not to travel to the Milwaukee event. New York Times saying there might only be about 300 people at that convention, and that includes media and security. This is going to be very different. We've all covered many conventions. Does it make a difference, Byron?
I think it will, right? Because part of presidential campaigns, certainly in the fall, is momentum and enthusiasm. So what level of momentum and enthusiasm will the Democrats have with a virtual convention? I think certainly if the election were held today, Donald Trump's in trouble. If it's held on Tuesday, Donald Trump's in trouble. But it's not. It's in November. A lot can change between now and then. So I think Democrats should be careful about celebrating now that they think they can beat this guy. We all know that Joe Biden has his own vulnerabilities that have not been looked at closely, but they will be at some point. We don't know what the world will look like. We don't know where race and justice will stand in this country and how angry people and who will be angry in the fall. So I think both sides have reason to be concerned. Both candidates both men are flawed in their own ways. Both have bases. I think one can make the argument that Donald Trump's base is more enthusiastic, more passionate. We have no doubt about nothing's going to change their mind. But I think a lot could change, not whether people don't like Donald Trump, but will they feel engaged enough? Will they not be exhausted and be willing to go out and support Joe Biden?
And Heidi, one of the things they obviously want to show, no matter what this convention looks like, is unity. You've got the progressive side, the moderate side. How do you think Joe Biden's doing combining that? Is he going too far to the progressive side?
No, I mean, he is saying exactly what he said to win the nomination. He is bringing people in, getting new ideas. He's doing what he needs to do right now to prepare to be a president. And I would say the only thing that can change, that will change the trajectory of this election, is Donald Trump and his behavior. If he can convince people between now and election that he's the leader that this country needs and wants moving into the future, he's got a shot at winning re-election. But right now, there's nothing to suggest. I mean, boat parades aside, there is nothing to suggest that he has any increased momentum beyond his base, and that is inadequate to win the election. And Joe Biden is playing this exactly right. I know there's a lot of people, some on this show in the past, who have said, oh, he needs to do this or he needs to do that. When you're up 15% in the polls, you need to keep doing what you're doing. And that's what Biden's doing. And I think he's preparing right now to lead the country, because when he takes over, this country is going to need a strong leader to begin to move this country forward again.
And Chris, I have got about 10 seconds here to go, but I want to ask you, you made some news this week regarding your own political aspirations. You said you're definitely looking at a second go at the presidency.
Well, Martha, there's no reasons for anybody to rule anything out, but let's get this election done first and see what's going to happen over the next 15 weeks. And I'll tell you this, Joe Biden is going to have a challenge. He's going to have a challenge when he has to get out there and greet the American people and speak to them. So let's see what happens in the next 15 weeks.
Okay, thanks so much for joining us, all of our roundtablers.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.